You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, Star Wars fans,
I'm Connor,
and I'm Alex.
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars.
So, this is part 7 of our EU review, going through all the canon novels present in Star Wars. Um, uh,
So, remind our listeners, what kind of era are we in? Because it seems like uh, since the Disney canon started, the expanded universe has sort of been in response to or in preparation of certain Star Wars events.
yeah, so those who listened to episode 60, our last EU review, will remember that we talked through those tie in novels to Solo, the next two novels in the New Thrawn trilogy to discuss his character and expand on it after his depiction in Rebels, and then a few other works expanding on sort of the prequel era of things with Chewbacca and Padme and Obi-Wan. This area of novels goes back to some more gritty military fiction, uh, sort of set in the pre-Mandalorian era, showing what led up to the Battle of Jakku and how did the Empire go from the Death Star being destroyed to being completely defeated and having the Republic established, as well as those works that led up to the opening of the Galaxy's Edge Park at Disney and establishing the importance of the planet of Batuu as sort of this microcosm of the Star Wars universe with both its own identity but also an intersection of all the various factions in the sequel era.
Mhm.
And then the last couple of novels that we'll talk about are also bridging the gap between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. How did the Resistance, who was almost completely wiped out after the Battle of Crate, reestablish a base and find help and aid of any kind again after they were reduced to a mere handful of core members?
Mhm. So we're getting into this era that is sort of wrapping up this gap in between Return of the Jedi and the sequel trilogy, although we're still going to get many, you know, pieces of media in between there at some point. But really getting our headspace in that this is right before the Rise of Skywalker came out, so we're tying up loose threads as far as that goes as well.
And this is also you'll see as we go through these works, and I won't belabor the point too long, where there is now enough of a corpus in the Star Wars new canon as far as novels, comics, things tied into the various shows, games, and movies that they all have a strong foundation to build off of. And well, some can be a little bit okay. Is everyone going to get that reference? There's some satisfaction to be found in how they all build off of each other. Like, oh, this is because Hera became General Hera Syndulla after the events of Rebels, and that's why she shows up as a main character here.
Mhm.
And oh, and this is the same Resistance operative who was being interrogated by Captain Cardinal in the Phasma backstory novel, but now here's her in the greater context of the Resistance and how she ties in as a character that we see in Galaxy's Edge and other places. Oh, and here's an Alphabet Squadron. They reference Vanguard Squadron are your main characters from the Squadron's video game.
Mhm.
So all of it starts to talk to each other, but not in a continuity lockout way, but in like a because you don't need to know who Vanguard Squadron was, but seeing the reference there, it all
Mhm.
feels like, especially one of the novels talk about today, Resistance Reborn. It pulls in all of these pieces from various other media and shows how significant they are,
Mhm.
from Maz Kanata to the Battle of Jakku and so on. So it's where we're starting into a more we're after the initial flurry of capitalize on the Star Wars property.
Mhm.
You
How can
know,
we sync this together and tell a compelling story?
yeah, where Rise of Skywalker, has mixed reception, but then The Mandalorian following it had much better reception. We're starting to see identifying the most compelling parts of Star Wars and expand on that.
So yeah, so to begin on that, we have a trilogy of novels, and I this is a renowned trilogy. I've heard of this. I've heard you speak about it. I've heard it in the zeitgeist of modern day Star Wars, and that is the Alphabet Squadron trilogy. So.
Yes, so the Alphabet Squadron is one of the linchpin trilogies of the new Star Wars canon, operating in a similar place, at least aesthetically and storytelling wise, to the old X-Wing novels, but with a much darker flair. Um, the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, consisting of the novels Alphabet Squadron, Shadowfall, and Victory's Price tell the story of a group of 5 fighter pilots who pilot 5 different types of ships in the New Republic Navy. We have their leader, Yurika, in an X-Wing, who is a former Imperial TIE fighter pilot and captain who is then defects or is recruited by a New Republic intelligence operative to lead this ragtag squadron, because their primary antagonist is the former TIE fighter wing, Shadow Wing, that she was a ace member of.
Mm-hmm.
We have Kairos, a mysterious masked woman who flies a U-Wing. We have old hand, former Republic era fighter pilot, turned smuggler, turned criminal, turned Imperial pilot, now turned or defected to the New Republic pilot, Nath Tencent, who flies his old Y-Wing. We have Will Lark, an excellent flyer, terrible shot, an idealist from a peaceful, pacifistic planet. And then we have one of the survivors from the Battle of Endor, whose entire squadron died at the Battle of Endor. And so she was from one of the B-Wing strike forces that helped Lando get to the Death Star, and she, in fact, seeks death the rest of the series because she believes she should have died at the Battle of Endor, and that she's lost her chance to have a hero's death. Her name is Chas Na Chaddock.
So we have a very colorful and eclectic band of these heroes. Do we have a sort of a leading force, someone who is unifying them?
So they all share space. But if I had to pick a main character, it's Yurika, because she's their leader.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably the protagonist is Will Lark. They all get viewpoint chapters. So honestly, I say that, but Kairos is a very alien. Like, she's from an alien people, and so she barely speaks. So we only get a few viewpoint characters from her, but she still remains important to the narrative. But our viewpoint characters, Yurika might be the primary, but we split time between her underlings as well, and we also get viewpoint chapters from their primary antagonist, Major Corin Seas, who is like kind of a Knight Templar. He's not a loyalist to the Empire anymore, but he's kind of this fatalistic loyalist to his own people,
Mm-hmm.
and does not believe any of them will survive surrendering to the New Republic. He doesn't believe they can survive resisting the New Republic, so tries to get them all a warrior's death
Mm-hmm.
by destroying as much of the New Republic as he can. And then their commander of Yurika is ultimately General Hera Syndulla, who is the leader of this task force that is helping pursue Shadow Wing and attempting to bring in the last holdouts under the control of the New Republic in the march to the Battle of Jakku.
So far, she's the only familiar sounding character, which is making for an interesting background for this book series.
Yeah, we do not get many returning characters. People are mentioned. Luke Skywalker is mentioned as a hero of many battles,
Mm-hmm.
though several of their characters just think he's a propaganda piece. Obviously, no one person can blow up a Death Star.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, a Jedi coming back. Pfft. But so it's kind of like this Lower Decks episode, and it's also very dark in that Yurika at first hides the fact that she was someone who perpetrated Operation Cinder. Yurika personally probably killed millions of people, and hides that from her squadron, and when it's revealed, it does not go down well, and in fact, she's almost killed by her underlings.
Mm-hmm.
I was very frustrated with all of the characters throughout the whole novel, because they're all kind of terrible people,
Mm-hmm.
or the good people making bad decisions for understandable, human, but frustrating reasons.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone who's read other fiction, probably the closest I could get would be Glenn Cook's The Black Company, where we have just these old, damaged soldiers. But by the end of this, all of our main characters are suffering from significant post-traumatic stress disorder. They're all engaging in unhealthy behaviors. We get moments of triumph where they gel as a squadron and are successful, but their victories never last long. They are manipulated, they make bad choices, they turn on each other. One almost joins a cult. One considers selling them out to the Empire, what actually does, but then regrets it. Or did he? Or was he actually part of a long-term plan the whole time? Or was he just Was he just planning on being able to come out on top whichever side won?
Mhm.
So the first book generally deals with their first few missions against Shadow Wing, and we also get the viewpoint of Major Soren as he is hunted as a terrorist. I mean, he also helped perpetrate Operation Cinder. He's hunted as a terrorist by New Republic intelligence across the galaxy until eventually he's actually trying to do this whole Robin Hood thing where he tries to better communities he finds, but he keeps being found by New Republic intelligence because he's a mass murderer. So because they don't allow him to rest, he's like, fine, then I'll go destroy your New Republic and rejoin Shadow Wing to lead them in success against the New Republic. The second novel is set in there's a giant city, planet-wide city that has great resources that the Empire is clinging to. And then the third novel is the final plan to bring down Shadow Wing, and it's the attempt of Major Soren Kryze to destroy the database that the Emperor kept on all of the Imperial personnel so he could decide who would have the chutzpah and the loyalty to commit Operation Cinder, which Major Soren believes the New Republic will use to, hold war crime trials and put all of his, prevent a successful reconciliation. He is, as we see in the time of Ahsoka, he may have underestimated the New Republic's willingness to just straight up employ old members of the Imperial apparatus, or perhaps this shows he was successful in the destruction of the database that allowed many of these old Imperial loyalists to successfully infiltrate and weaken the New Republic, which is why it was so easily damaged and perhaps even toppled by the First Order.
So, taking a step back and looking at the series, so we have this trilogy of novels, and we don't usually come out of the gate with a trilogy. It's usually standalone stories in the Star Wars universe that help expand on some characters. It's been a while since we've had one that's really centered around protagonists that are exclusive to the novel themselves.
Yeah.
So do you feel as though the story necessitates a trilogy? Do you feel like it's structured well in an arc that way? There, very few things do a trilogy better than Star Wars, unless, your creator's last name is Tolkien.
Yeah, you definitely needed a trilogy to tell all the story they wanted to build up the idiosyncrasies of these 5 main characters and then the other supporting characters. The antagonists get almost as much screen time as the protagonists. Their trials, their travails, their bonding, their attempt to kill each other. You definitely needed the page space. And then you get lots of thrilling, tense military action from the Empire's attempt to blow up a refinery that's going to destroy the livelihood of an entire planet, to Will Lark having to take command and leading a ragtag group of militia fighters to hold off Shadow Wing long enough for refugees to escape, to Yurika reliving Operation Cinder, Rashomon style. First, the version she told to hide intelligence of the New Republic, where she disobeyed orders and defected, to the real story, where she ruthlessly carried out her orders until she was ordered to lie about it and attempt to infiltrate the New Republic to save her own life by Major Soren, who could see that they would never be forgiven by the New Republic for the entire planets they destroyed as part of Operation Cinder. So this is also a sign of what I talked about at the start of the episode, where we start to see events that actually meld together from other media in a seamless way. Operation Cinder was original to the Battlefront 2 campaign, where your protagonist was an Imperial operative who defected when ordered to commit Operation Cinder. And now we see what happens when Imperials did not defect during Operation Cinder and carried it out. They caused planet-wide storms that wiped out an entire planet. She felt bad about it, but and even
these were orders. These were, as part of the damage of these characters.
Yeah, they're all incredibly damaged. I mean, even the people who never question their loyalty to they keep referring it to the rebellion. Some of them were much more comfortable being rebels than being members of an organized military. So, yeah, they're a smuggler, a death seeker. So it's like, and you end up very frustrated with them in a believable way. But then you also pity them because it's not their fault that they're like this. They've been in war. If there's any work or trilogy of novels that's less about the sanitized version of war, we have Thrawn, who holds himself above conflict and is cold and calculating. We had the Aftermath trilogy, where we had this camaraderie grow between this group and they clung to each other. This is sort of where we have a bunch of soldiers who shouldn't have survived and have, and they do cling to each other, but sort of in this codependent way. And one of the things I find most interesting is we do figure out what happens to all of the characters at the end. One becomes a senator, one dies. Two of them enter into a relationship after hating each other and start a small transport company. And we get this final scene at the very end where they're all like some of the survivors or three of the survivors sitting around a table reminiscing, and it feels very much like a bunch of Vietnam War buddies sitting around. And it's like there's no one else I can talk about the time we accidentally shot up that village under orders, or about the time that we saw our best friend dying in the mud over there. So it's drawing on that energy where it's almost this Saving Private Ryan-esque. In war, we did terrible things both to our enemies and to each other, and how do you move past that? Can you move past that?
So it sounds quite interesting in that usually we have sort of squeaky clean protagonists who are just eager to, go out, experience the world, and they're still wet behind the ears, and to have a set of protagonists who are already at that point where they are burnt out, where they are kind of sullied by war, and put them through the ringer to see how they can restart this republic. Sounds quite interesting, and it's good to hear that the ending has a satisfying conclusion as well.
Yep. I will say, if you have trouble with dark fiction, this is hard. Like, your characters will be mean to each other. They will make bad decisions. You will want to beg them not to do what they're about to do. You will tell Will to please just shoot the person who's about to shoot the transport. But he'll be like, everyone deserves a second chance. And then they're going to kill a bunch more people. You will beg Nath to stop. Don't sell anyone else out, please. These people actually do like you. And we'll have him watch him betray the group again. He'll say, Kairos, please stop letting your cultural baggage from your own people. You can overcome that. These people like you. To insist on doing the most damaging thing she possibly can. So everyone is bound and ruled by their traumas. He'll say, Chas, everyone likes you. Please don't kill yourself. Don't keep throwing yourself into fights hoping that you'll die. And so there's hope, but it's tempered by a lot of realism. I would say the plot can sometimes... So talking about it as a works of fiction, the plot sometimes tries to do a little much. Like, there's lots and lots and lots of moving pieces. There's plots within plots. There's the battle plans of the Republic. There's the operations of the Major, who's trying to fight them off. There's the individual motivations of every character. There's this intelligence officer who's giving them directions, and the droid that he has with him. So there's a lot to keep track of. This is not a novel where you have a single viewpoint from beginning to end, telling a simple story. This is a deep Game of Thrones style. You have to follow many viewpoint characters and understand where they're going from, and dealing with emotionally fraught topics. So this is not for the 12-year-old fan of Star Wars who really wants to see some cool dogfights. This is an adult, mature, dark fiction. There's mentions of torture. There are mentions of dismemberment, of war crimes, of genocide. There is depicted genocide. So this is one of the darker works of Star Wars media. There's no squeaky, nothing squeaky clean here. So, and this is not also really. It's a trilogy. It's not really. You can't really jump in anywhere. You have to read from beginning to end. Start with the first one, Alphabet Squadron, and end with Victory's Price.
So yeah, sounds excellent, and it sounds much akin to Andor and the amount of mature storytelling and spinning plates that program is able to balance.
Yeah, though more on the military fiction side than on the political crime thriller side.
Yeah, more espionage type.
Yeah, it is a little bit. Almost gets a little heavy for its own weight of all the things it's trying to do, but I found it very well written, very true to all the characters, are very distinct. And the fact that you're begging a character not to take a course of action they're probably going to take is a sign that you've got a pretty well-written character here.
Yeah.
And as far as world building, it's fun to see Hera talking about flying the Ghost and about her son Jason, who was mentioned several times, then finally depicted on screen in Ahsoka. To see people refer to the Battle of Endor and what it was like, because while it was portrayed as a great victory, a lot of people died. A lot of people died on Alderaan. So to see the price of war. And then to see the imperial perspective, how people were just following orders, and it was the primary government for 20 years, and it fell, and they were put in a position where they were making impossible choices. What do they do now? Does the novel's like, do you want to sympathize with these people? They're still doing horrible things. Or were they left in any other position? Were there any easy answers for anyone here? The answer is usually no, and you have to decide for yourself if any of their conduct is justified.
So yeah, very much seems like fans of Andor would enjoy the book series, but who else?
So, as a work of fiction, intricate, dark, compelling, character-driven. The plot gets a little over-complex at times, and we get a lot of introspection inside characters' heads that can get a little overwrought at times, depending on your tolerance for character introspection. As a piece of Star Wars media, I wouldn't say incredibly vital, but I mean, if Aftermath is showing the political side of what happened to transform the rebellion into the Republic, this is showing the military side. This is the third novel after the Aftermath trilogy and Lost Stars that depicts the Battle of Jakku, along with Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Yeah.
But as a piece of for world building, though, if you want to see it all brought together, this definitely shows you the military side of the evolution there and how people survived the transition and why the New Republic may have turned out the way that it did, and where did all those Imperials go? Well, if you read those who read the Aftermath trilogy were probably not all that surprised when we saw an Imperial probe droid on Coruscant taking orders back to Moff Gideon, or seeing a bunch of Imperial loyalists helping Morgan Elspeth send supplies to make her jump to another galaxy device. The truth is that there were way more Imperial sympathizers than were expected, and the database of all of them was destroyed. So,
leading very swiftly to the First Order.
Yes.
In a matter of decades. So yeah, so we have the Alphabet Squadron, strong start. That brings us to our next case of A Crash of Fate.
So, A Crash of Fate begins the group of novels that were written alongside the opening of Galaxy's Edge at Disney World in Florida.
So it's, my initial response to hearing that is going to be skeptical, but let's see how the books fare in shaping this world.
So I actually really like them because while they were given a topic, the authors themselves were given broad range to kind of do what they wanted. So I personally found the planet that is mentioned is always Batuu, which gets our first mention in the Thrawn Alliance's book we talked about last time. But Batuu is the setting of the entire book other than a few shots before people arrive on Batuu, of A Crash of Fate. Yep, so A Crash of Fate is a YA novel written by Zoraida Cordova. It features two primary characters, Izzy and Jules. So Jules is a local to Batuu who ends up staying on Batuu. His friend Izzy then her parents are killed, and she has to become a smuggler to make ends meet. For a job, eventually she comes back to Batuu. She and Jules had a crush on each other when young, but consider that she's been away for years. Jules has had to take care of his family. And she's now comes back 13 years after that. And so it's kind of a crime story. They both get mixed up in something, but they have this powerful connection. It's probably one of the more overt romantic stories that we've had in Star Wars, in that Izzy and Jules fall deeply in love with each other after this crash of fate back into each other. And you're excited to see where their relationship goes. It feels very natural and real. They're young adults who are deeply tied to each other, and they're on the run from criminals, but they're remembering about their childhood together. We're seeing more about the traditions of Batuu, about like the great black spires that are all over Black Spire outposts, and the local power brokers that are all around, and how they adapt back into that. So while Batuu is sort of the backstory, and we actually then do see people from other of these tie-in novels, it turns out the package that Izzy's there to deliver is for the resistance cell on the planet, which we'll see getting established soon in another novel. And then they're pursued by the First Order, and also by the crime bosses on Batuu, all of whom we meet as well. But the focus is really on the relationship between Jules and Izzy.
So, as far as like differences between this and Lost Stars, this is a YA novel. Lost Stars was a standard novel, if memory serves. So, how well does it handle telling a Star Wars love story? Because Star Wars is, as we've said, every kind of storytelling. It is your science fiction, fantasy, western, samurai, love, war.
So Lost
Yeah.
Stars is technically also YA, though
Okay.
YA just mean well, the bound between YA and adult novels in Star Wars can be
Hmm.
blurry, and I would say both are worthy of reading by any age group above the age of 16.
Hmm.
But I would say so. Lost Stars is actually kind of opposite approach to a love story. Lost Stars is told over the course of 20 years. Um, a Crash of Fate, the primary plot takes place over the course of a day.
Hmm.
We get flashes back, or a few days,
Hmm.
but they meet in a day, and the plot goes very quickly from there.
Very
So,
Romeo and Juliet.
yep. So more Romeo and Juliet than pining after each other for years.
Mhm.
So, but yeah. But overall, a Crash of Fate, it actually very much immerses you in this unique culture of Batuu, kind of in the same way that Andor does for his home planet. Um, you get the unique traditions there, tying fabric to the black spires to make a wish. They have a unique currency there called Spira that they use instead of credits because, um,
Credits don't work here.
yeah, they're on the outer rim. There's no other
Mhm.
standard to hold it to. We have the conflict between the Resistance and the First Order, but that's all very far away. The New Republic doesn't hold sway here. Local crime bosses control a lot of what goes on. We have Hondo Onaka running a trading company who's mentioned.
Good
So,
old Hondo.
yep. We mentioned Doc Ondar, the collector, who runs his shop. Jules does jobs for him. So all of these elements that are key to Batu are mentioned in this novel, but not like, oh, here's a kaleidoscope or a slideshow of everything about it. It all is
Mhm.
how it figures into the plot. Jules does jobs for Doc Ondar, and then, oh, the package is he's delivering is for the Resistance. Of course, the First Order try to stop her. But the focus remains intensely on their relationship and their this sort of star-crossed lovers. They've been separated, now they're together. The galaxy forces people into strange places. Jules takes too much on for his family and is too self-sacrificing. Izzy doesn't believe she's worthy of anyone loving her, and they both have to get over that and grow as people together.
Well, it sounds like for something that could be a cynical cash grab trying to convince the youth to go to Disney's Galaxy's Edge, it sounds like they at least put effort into the story in order to make something that's captivating and worthwhile. So, how are we looking at this as a comparison to other Star Wars novels and then just as a work of media in general?
So, as a work of media in general, I mean, it's not doing anything special as far as writing goes. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot. It is a I I enjoy a good love story. I enjoy a tightly paced narrative. I enjoy good characterization, and this has that. This novel does not have a lot of wasted space. It's not like Alphabet Squadron where there might be like, did we need that entire chapter from the Major's perspective where he's minutely examining his own motivations and determining, yes, I remain just in what I'm doing.
Hmm.
We get this is faster paced. It's a YA novel, so um, there's passion, there's adventure, there's crime, there's fights, there's oh my god, that person's dead. So
Hmm.
as an actual novel, I found it fast paced, enjoyable. You can read this in a couple of days if you're a quick reader, or I read it in one setting. Um,
You
but
also have the superhuman ability to read.
for hours, yes.
Yes.
So, which is why Connor gave me this job.
I think this was a self-imposed position. So,
Yeah.
but I'm not arguing about it. Yeah.
And as a piece of Star Wars world building, I mean, it's really there to set up the planet of Batuu.
Mhm.
Not in a cynical way, but in like here is a planet with its own unique culture. And I read this having never gone to, or I currently don't plan to have any plans to go to Galaxy's Edge, but I enjoyed this for uh, portraying this interesting planet, both from through the eyes of children and through the eyes of adults who return to their hometown to see how it's changed.
Just thank goodness it wasn't on Tatooine again.
Yeah, I am. I don't think we have any books today, Connor, that
Mhm.
mention Tatooine.
No media. No
Actually,
media
sorry, the Force
today.
Collector does mention Tatooine, but they don't
Damn
go
it.
there.
That's fine. That's fine. But any other thoughts on A Crash of Fate?
I would recommend this for pretty much any Star Wars fan. Is it a key part of understanding the greater Star Wars story? No. Yeah, you're not gonna. The characters from Crash of Fate have not appeared in anything else. But also, if you're looking like I just want a novel I could read and I don't have to know 1,700 pieces of backstory, Give this one a go. There's recognizable things. There are blasters. There is the Resistance. There is the First Order. But there's also, it's a new planet. It's fresh and vibrant. You want to know about a smuggler who falls back in love with her farmhand and odd job boyfriend from a long time ago, and it turns out that they can survive against everything the galaxy throws at them. Give this one a read.
Just reminded me of the Princess Bride at the end there.
Oh, there's definitely inspiration from the Princess Bride in this novel.
Wish as you wield. Looks like our next two books are more so collections of a sort.
Yes. So, and we include these today because there's two novels that we're going to talk about collectively as well, both by George Mann. There is Star Wars Myths and Fables and Star Wars Dark Legends, each of which is a collection, one of which more positive, one of which on the darker, more brooding side, more on the almost the horror aspect, which are tales told from an in-universe perspective in Star Wars about different myths, legends, fables, dark stories told around a campfire. And they actually sold these originally at Galaxy's Edge. You can get versions there, but the versions of Galaxy's Edge each had bonus stories. So it was another way to entice people to go spend money in Florida.
It's a subchapter of one of our episodes, spending more money in Florida. So taking a look at what sort of setting, what sort of stories are being told. We've talked about Star Wars Visions, where we have just a variety of different eras, different characters, standalone stories. Is that something akin to what we get with these books, or is it a little bit more diverse?
It's very diverse. You get this from a variety of peoples. They're definitely told as sort of like adaptations of oral traditions, or stories told around a campfire, or mythology from within the Star Wars universe. It all takes it from with the inside the universe lens. And there's a dozen stories in each of these, so I'm not going to go over them specifically. But for example, we get a legend that Obi-Wan Kenobi inspired when he helped defeat a Krayt dragon from a Tusken Raider tribe that was kidnapping townsfolk to sacrifice to the Krayt dragon. We hear about a Jedi on a planet called the Wanderer who helped save a capital city from destruction 3 times. He practiced the fairy tale rule of 3. We get the story of the Dark Wraith, who was a vengeful spirit on the same planet that arose. The Wanderer never appeared, and wreaked vengeance on a city for its immoral ways. And we get the story of how the Mon Cala came to be ascendant on their planet, or how a certain aquatic species became ascendant on their planet after their neighbors grew above their station and took too many natural resources. So they are portrayed in the Myths and Fables one. They're definitely portrayed with like a moral or an Aesop, similar to Aesop's Fables. So here's what you should learn from this story. Here's what it says about this. So whether it's this is also where I had mentioned in our previous episode about Grievous, where we had a story exploring how droids felt about him. Myths and Fables is where we hear that story about Grievous in the story The Droid with a Heart.
So these are very much stories told within the universe of Star Wars. These are stories told by the characters in Star Wars to other characters in Star Wars. So.
Yeah, and not so directly, but we definitely get... we literally have one story that is there's a family of 4 girls, and the oldest girl sets out to do a task with her blaster and doesn't return. And so then the next youngest says, I will then do that, and goes out and fails. And then it's up to the youngest child to use her clever wits to go and outsmart the slaver and save her sisters. So very much, they're pretty much fairy tales. They are fairy tales, and they're set in Star Wars.
Interesting. So how do our Dark Legends compare?
Ooh, the Dark Legends I love. So the Myths and Fables, they have some more positive stories, some more negative, like any fairy tales. Dark Legends are definitely ghost stories you tell around a campfire. They are not like, perhaps a little bit fraught. They're very fraught. There's straight up a werewolf story told on a group of explorers who go to a planet where the ancient star that the planet orbits has a heart of corrupted kyber crystal, so red kyber, and that then brings out the most base instincts of all the people who land on the planet. So when a Shavastavan, who is a sort of like a furred person lands, it brings out his ancient evolutionary instincts, and he starts hunting down the other members of the crew. We have the story of the Grand Inquisitor, who starts to, in the orphanage, who starts to abduct Force-sensitive children from the orphanage.
Creepy.
Yeah, and told from the perspective of a Force-sensitive child who recognizes them and uses her powers to call out, and so a surviving Jedi arrives to help rescue the children from the Inquisitor.
Mm-hmm.
Did that actually happen? We don't know. Yeah. We get a story of a Sith, Darth Noctis, who attempted to seek immortality and paid a terrible, terrible price for it.
As most of them do.
Yeah. So stories like that. Like, we get Sith masks with souls bound to them that bring out the deaths of their masters. We get ancient Sith who have done terrible things to each other. We get the story of another ancient dark side user who froze herself in stasis, manipulated an archaeologist to confine her because every millennia or so she needed to suck the life from another person to maintain her eternal youth.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say these are... So as pieces of writing, they are simple. I would say they are appropriate even for like late elementary, early middle school children. There's no complex wordplay going on here. Some of the spookier ones from Dark Legends, maybe wait till it's a slightly older child.
Mm-hmm.
Any adult could read these and enjoy them because they're written sort of that timeless fairy tale style. But I actually say that these are really great from a world building perspective because they're written from in-universe.
Mm-hmm.
So you see stories from the Ewok perspective, stories from a particular planet about after all the Jedi are gone, how did Jedi legends develop? You get stories about the even Dark Legends the Sith tell themselves, and surprisingly deep world building about the Sith and how they sought things out. Another of the Dark Legends tells about the conflict between Darth Kaldoth and the Night Sisters and how they attempted to manipulate and control the other, never trusting each other. No one ever trusts the Sith.
Oh, never. Even the Sith don't trust the Sith. I mean, especially. But yeah, this it reminds me of the words of one famous Doug Walker, the nostalgia critic, where if you have a story where the characters in that story have their own myths and legends, that makes for a truly captivating world. So he was referring to the Legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise. So to have two tomes like this, where we're looking at different legends, different myths in the Star Wars universe, it just makes that world so much more rich.
So I would recommend these for anyone, whether it's the shortened versions, if you can find the versions that have the extra couple of stories from, a couple of them are set from the High Republic period, that were bonus directly from Galaxy's Edge, feel free, but the best stories are the ones that were in the base collections, and they are excellent.
Nice.
They tell you more about the Sith, more about the Jedi, more about hyperspace, more about crate dragons, anything. It's a great little insight into how myths are remembered in the Star Wars universe.
So excellent. Sounds like some quality reads, and just knowing that there's a story in here about a Black Spire and hearing about Black Spires in the Crash, or I'm sorry, of the Crash of Fate. Our next book is Black Spire.
Yep. So Black Spire is the second of our books that is exploring the planet of Batuu. This is also a direct sequel to Phasma. Phasma was the story of how Vi Marati, Resistance operative, was being interrogated by Captain Cardinal, who wanted dirt on his primary rival, Captain Phasma.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out Captain Phasma was an utter bastard who had murdered her way to her position and, in fact, attempted to kill Captain Cardinal. Barely survived after Vi Marati saved him, and they escaped together, and she deprogrammed him and is now trying to mostly turn him over to the side of the Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So Black Spire is set on Batuu, and it is taking place in the wake of the Battle of Crate, when the Resistance has been almost completely destroyed. So they need help. They need to make sure that they are not put in the position where they have nowhere else to go again. So Vi Marati's goal is to journey with a former Captain Cardinal to... he has a name, but I don't want to spoil it for anyone who wants to read the book. He takes on an actual name. It goes to the planet of Batuu as someone that's out of the way enough, but near enough hyperspace lanes to make a good base for the Resistance to have a presence. So, and she needs to gather recruits, supplies, communications equipment, and all of those things. So Vi Marati says, okay, I'll go. I've now survived the torture. In fact, I have now, the person who tortured me, I have now turned him to our side. Hooray. And we're going to go together. And so it's the story of how she recruits several other local people and drifters passing through just from a group of friends, and then they become a resistance cell. Though she is then hunted by a captain of the First Order, and someone that Captain Cardinal himself trained. Yeah, and then she eventually comes into contact with the First Order cell. The loyalties of people in the Black Spire Outpost are tested. They don't particularly like the Resistance, but they don't like the First Order either. And so we see how all of the power plays that our group has made play out as they attempt to keep the Resistance foothold on Batuu.
So does this stand alone well as its own book, or does it serve better as a sequel? Do we need to have read Phasma to understand the background motivations of the characters in Black Spire?
You probably don't need to have read Phasma first because it's really a sequel to the framing narrative of Phasma. Because
Sure.
the book of Phasma, 95% of it is the story of Phasma. 5% of it is the framing narrative. But you should read Phasma because it's a great book, and this is written by the same person that wrote Phasma.
Sure.
Delilah Dawson, who writes excellent Star Wars novels, by the way. If you see Dawson's name on a book, go ahead and read it. You won't be disappointed. So Delilah Dawson, who also wrote Phasma, wrote this, but you could just read it by itself. Just Cardinal, former Imperial operative, recruited by Vi Marati. They need to go establish a resistance base. This is primarily a character-driven work. The plot is very simple. We must establish a base. But then the ultimate, and you see, it's a fairly realistic take on, okay, we are a insurgent military group that wants the best for the community that we're embedded in. How do we embed ourselves in the community in a way that both benefits that community, but also keeps us safe from our enemies? And so you're like, oh, and it does result in some deaths, and some people are hurt by the First Order, and are they justified in doing that? But yeah, there's some cool, like, oh, we're exploring this old cave system, and the group is now bonding together. Also some good representation. Former Captain Cardinal develops an attraction to Vi Marati, who's like, I'm sorry, I'm not into that. She's like, not into men? She's like, no, I don't do sex at all. So it's one of the first openly asexual characters in Star Wars, where Vi Marati is like, nope, my only interest is in the Resistance, but we can be friends. And he's like, all right, that's good, we'll be friends.
It's a good progression, yeah.
Yeah. And also fairly realistic, like we don't have any, like, there's some combat and some fighting in the book, but it's kind of, you feel afraid for the characters all the time. This is also, despite being a YA book, this is not something where your characters feel safe. People get shot and it's a big deal. This is not Leia's arm getting grazed by the shield generator. This is, oh my god, if she doesn't get medical attention, she's going to die.
Sure. Which we never see in Star Wars other than Anakin getting burnt up.
Yes, so the stakes, and I appreciate also that the stakes in this novel are fairly low, but in a way that's very important for the characters involved. Are we going to establish our base? Will we manage to fight off the First Order? Will the people of the Black Spire Outpost allow us to stay? Will we win over enough of them where the crime bosses will kick us out?
Gotcha. So low stakes, high drama. How would you rank this? Because we've we're kind of bouncing around some YA novels, some more serious military novels. Where does this one slot in?
So I would rate this high as far as the quality written by Delilah Dawson. So I would rate the quality high. The quality of the writing, the quality of the storytelling, the way the plot progresses and is paced, top shelf. As far as like world building for the greater Star Wars universe, I mean, they set up a base for the Resistance, and it's not mentioned at all in the Rise of Skywalker or subsequently. So could it have been great? Yes. Did it end up tying into the greater novel? No. Will it help you understand? Oh, how did they get resources again after they were reduced to such a small state after the after the Battle of Crate in The Last Jedi? This helps fill in those gaps, though a book we'll talk about in a minute fills in more of those gaps. But in general, this is worth reading just on its own merit for the depiction of the planet of Batuu again, which I enjoy as a fictional place to go to. It's not Tatooine, and it is a planet that's been allowed to breathe and grow its own traditions, and for the strength of the characters involved. It's definitely less plot-driven and more character-driven, and for the better for it.
Gotcha. So strong book, strong contender. So we'll get to the conclusion of this Batuu trilogy.
So Black Spire is the second book in the trilogy about Batuu, but is also the first book in the let's bridge the gap between The Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker.
Gotcha.
So it's serving double duty there.
Interesting. whilst also being a sequel to Phasma. So it's a
They gave
triple
they gave
contender.
Dawson a hard job and she did well.
Yeah.
So now we have the next two books are books that, along with Black Spire, are intending to bridge the gap between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, which was hard to do given the fact that not even the directors of those films talk to each other ever.
Right.
If you want to know more about our thoughts on how the sequel trilogy could have been more coherent, go look at those episodes about missed opportunities.
Mhm.
But these books are trying to do some of the work that we recommended was done anyway to bridge those gaps. So the first one is a junior novel. We do not need to spend a lot of time on it, but it's called Spark of the Resistance. So it is, again, a junior novel, so one step below YA, but one step above, an actual young children's book.
Mhm.
So, written for most middle schoolers to be able to get through.
Sure.
This is not my favorite novel, I will say. I think I've praised some junior novels, saying that despite the reading level, that it was fine. This one is okay. So, basically the plot, so it primarily focuses on Rey, Poe, Rose, and BB-8. Rose being in here is one of the better parts. We get some characterization for Rose, who then drops off the radar for most of the rest of Star Wars. So we get her thoughts of like her sister dying and their failure and how are they going to get back to this. And Rey is feeling that she's a failed Jedi. We'll get more of her in the next novel. But because it's a junior novel, we don't get a whole lot of introspection from the characters. It's mostly plot really fast. And so they get a call for help. So despite the fact that they are just still at the point of barely having anyone left and just gathering supplies, they get a call for help from a local planet. And so, kind of needing a quick win, they decide, yes, we will go and help on the planet of Minfar. And there's a local species, the Zixon, who were at first ruled by the Empire and are now being threatened by the First Order. There's an an older tech lab that was being utilized to make a deadly weapon. Spark of the Resistance is, again, mostly the plot of how they save the Zixon from the First Order and stop a potential weapon called the Echo Horn from the First Order.
So, what about this does not stick well with you? Is it the writing by itself? Is it the plot? What makes this not rise above the other junior novels?
So, this, unlike some of the other junior novels, is kind of knowingly like, did these events actually happen, or is this just something that could have happened that a middle schooler could understand? I'm kind of on the latter part. It's not giving us anything we didn't know. It's like, oh, in that time between movies, here's a small adventure that our characters could have gone on. Do I believe that they really needed to go to the planet of Minfar to save the Echo Horn falling into the hands of a First Order scientist? It's very Monster of the Week. It's very, and though they're on the run, they went and did this. It doesn't really reveal anything new about the characters.
It sounds like it's very much kind of a rote. This is very much a novel for the youth. This is I've read stories like this when I was a kid, where it's the glove of Darth Vader and the marriage of Princess Leia. These aren't meant for grand adventures like your normal Star Wars. These are side tales for the children.
Yeah, so I read it, and I wasn't unhappy that I read it, but it didn't move the needle. Probably my favorite part of it was that it gave Rose some screen time, and she's not badly depicted in the book, and her warmth and need to help people is emphasized. But mostly it's the same characters we know, not really showing how traumatized they should be after the Battle of Crate, and just we have to save them from the First Order. So, if you have a middle schooler who really likes Star Wars and really likes the character of like Rose or Rey or Poe, give them this book. It's great for them to read. For the general Star Wars fan, I would only recommend this one if you are a hardcore completionist Star Wars fan. Like I said, you'll probably enjoy some elements of it, but it's not giving you anything else you didn't already know.
So, in that case, without shedding more light on something that does not deserve it, let's look at the next piece. We have the confusingly titled Resistance Reborn.
All right. Now, this is honestly one of my favorite Star Wars novels I've ever read, which is strange because it's set in a period that most people don't like, about things that most people haven't uh, mentioned. But honestly, big fan. So, Resistance Reborn, written by Rebecca Roanhorse, is sort of almost like a coda of all of the EU stuff that's come before it, the
Hmm.
expanded universe stuff. So this is where we actually dig into how is the Resistance surviving their escape from Crate. Our primary characters are Finn and Poe, Rey, Rose, Chewbacca, and Leia. And really, our big focus is on our big three: Rey, Poe, and Finn. And uh, Finn didn't appear in our previous novel at all. Um, So it also contains content from the Poe Dameron comics in that
Hmm.
we mentioned other members of Poe's squadron and how they are sent out to get help, and also from Battlefront 2 about those individuals who joined the Resistance. Who I need to Eden Versio and her family. So we the Resistance originally takes refuge on Ryloth, the home world of the Twi'leks, who, despite the fall of the Republic, remain sympathetic to the Resistance and don't like the First Order, but at the same time don't have the military might to resist themselves.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
they,
I mean, the Twi'leks have been just on the poor end of the stick since the Clone Wars, it seems. There's always being victims of war in some way or another.
that is true. And so that's one reason they're sympathetic and want to. And it really, though, it's Leia's gravitas that gets them in.
Mhm.
She calls upon the debts owed to her family, to her from her rebellion days, to to get refuge on Ryloth. And then the primary thrust of the novel is about a mission that there's someone on that is going to sell a list of all of the operatives known to the Resistance to the First Order, and so Poe and Finn have to go infiltrate the party together and get that back.
Mhm.
So it sounds kind of like a simple plot, but it's actually really told really well.
Mhm.
Um, so we get the information about what happened to the members of Inferno Squad from Battlefront 2. They show up. Black Squadron, which was Poe's squadron that joined the Resistance. What are they up to? We get to that. They come and help. What happened to General Riken? He shows up and we get things from him. Wedge is present in the novel and is helping to get new recruits because he was settled down with his wife and letting his adopted son Snap Wexley take over. But then when he's called upon to at least help, uh, this actually does help bridge a lot of the gap. It turns out that
Mhm.
Wedge is like, I'm not going to rejoin the military, I'm too old, but I will go help you try to find allies and start
Mhm.
doing some recruiting. So
Doesn't he have a flight school or something that he's was running
that was
in
before he
Visions?
that's before he retired.
Sure.
But Vision, no, his flight school in Visions is certainly not canon.
Hmm.
He did run a flight school as part of the New Republic before he was tortured and retired in the Aftermath trilogy.
Understandable.
But he had settled down with his wife Nora Wexley, and but was convinced with Nora to come out of retirement to help them, um, reborn, making sure the Resistance is reborn.
Hmm.
Refer back to the title. Yeah, we even get characters from Bloodline, from Lost Stars, from the Aftermath trilogy. So Rebecca Roanhorse was given wide leave to pull in all of these dangling threads from the EU, all of people like everything, all of the things that were foreshadowing the founding of the Resistance. Those are all brought back, and so having read this, I'm still not a huge fan of many parts of the Rise of Skywalker,
Hmm.
but it does show that there is a wider group that supported the Resistance and that there was a wider network that they had access to. And while it was dramatized badly in the film, that there was a great deal of like local military and upswelling support that once people could get over their fear of the First Order or organized logistically, they had a chance to fight against.
Just imagine if this plot was conveyed in The Rise of Skywalker and was a part of that narrative thrust. Um, but then again, there's always a gap of time in between Star Wars films, so for this to have taken place between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker is fine, but having more of a visual struggle depicted in trying to rebuild the Resistance would have been very interesting, and it sounds like this book accomplishes that at least.
Yeah, we even get callbacks to small references to the middle of the road, not the best show, Star Wars Resistance, about operatives last seen on the planet of Castellan, which is where that show is set. So, um, and also this does great work for the characters of Finn, Poe, Rey, and Leia. Um, Poe is feeling like he's utterly screwed up after what he did in The Last Jedi. Caused the deaths of so many people because he couldn't stick with the plan. Finn is like, I doubted the cause and I was going to leave and I was barely brought back and I couldn't even save everybody. And so this also shows a very close friendship between Poe and Finn. And you could definitely read their interactions in this novel through the lens of a mutual attraction, which I personally take that viewing of their relationship as a potential one. Right?
Yeah.
They're both, like, it turns out that they have to attend this fancy party, and Finn confesses to Poe, I was brainwashed in the First Order. Other than wearing your jacket, I've never worn anything other than stormtrooper clothes before. And so then Poe is like, okay. And he shows him how to tie a tie and dress in a tux. And it's very touching and emotional. And they're standing very close together, telling each other how much they mean to each other. And I'm like, come on, guys, this is a romantic scene.
Like, never say never. We don't know what's going to happen with the new Jedi Order movie that's coming out. I know that's Rey focused, but John Boyega said he would never do a Star Wars Disney Plus show. It doesn't mean that he would be far away from the films.
Well, Robert Downey Jr. said he'd never come back to the MCU, and then Disney waved money.
Yes.
With increasing amounts at him, and now he's coming back. So,
hopefully they see John Boyega as being worth that.
Yeah, John Boyega, we'd love to have you back. So yeah, Resistance Reborn. If you're someone who reads a lot of the EU, or even just like, man, how did we? What? If you want to read one work that bridges the gap between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker to make it feel like a more cohesive story, this novel is putting that entire task on its back and is doing it pretty well. So, and if someone like me who is like exploring a lot of the EU, there's so many fun little callbacks. It's like, that's the guy from that thing. Or it's like, of course Xaversier would be here. She was just recruited 6 months ago. Or of course Black Squadron would be here. They just finished where Poe had sent them to get help back in the comic series after the Battle of Dakar.
So yeah, so it sounds like a rewarding read after having invested time in delving into the expanded universe.
Yeah, and it's also a fun heist story where you start out with all this political stuff, and then it's like, all right, we have the second half of the novel is the job. We have the job to steal the list from the party, escape the First Order, and then go sneak back through town with our list of operatives after putting it together. So, and it's got the heist setup where we don't know what the exact plan is. We know there is a plan, and then we flash back a little bit to, oh yeah, this was the plan. Either this step failed or did not. Because if they explain the whole heist plan at the start, it's going to fail.
Right.
So you can't. If you cut away from explaining the plan, then it has a greater chance to succeed.
So another strong entry, and kind of the conclusion of our gap material. That leaves us with a conclusion to our Batuu loose trilogy with the Force Collector.
Yep, this is our last novel that we'll talk about today. Before we next time talk about those the second of the new Thrawn trilogies, as well as some additional items expanding on the sequel era and the sequel to the Queen's Shadow series.
Yeah.
So before we get into those, we'll finish today with the YA novel, The Force Collector. So this one I enjoy because it is all new characters, almost entirely, and has a very small stake. So this was technically part of like the release to The Rise of Skywalker, but it doesn't really have anything you need to read. You can read it entirely standalone.
Sure, what era does it take place during?
So this does take place before the destruction of the First Order, and after the fall of the Republic. So sometime in the months-long gap between The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker. So our main character's name is Carr, who it turns out is Force sensitive. And it turns out his grandfather was a Jedi. And his grandmother tells him that it's probably, well, it could be his great-grandfather. But one of his great-grandfather was sensitive in the Force, and his grandmother tells his parents that. But on the planet they're on, no one's heard of the Jedi in a long time. All records of them have been erased. He knows very little about the Jedi. So Carr decides that he needs to go on a coming-of-age journey, accompanied by his friend Maze. Her father is a member of the First Order, so they steal his shuttle. And they go and they go to various planets, including Utapau, Jakku, Takudana, and Kar, who has an inherent ability to do psychometry or force echo, travels between places to explore what he can. Because previously he always wore gloves, because whenever he touched objects, he would get searing headaches and black out because he's not trained in how to use the force.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and anything from touching a a stormtrooper helmet, in other areas. Kar, he like force chokes one of his classmates. He's obviously out of control, so he's like, I need to leave and figure out what's going on with me. So he leaves with his friend Maze, and he goes to various places. He gets a lightsaber hilt from Batuu, from Doc Ondar. He finds various artifacts over the course of the novel, such as an Inquisitor's lightsaber hilt. And at first, he then thinks the Inquisitor was a Jedi. He's like, why do people worship the Jedi? And then he learns that it was actually a Jedi hunter that had the lightsaber hilt. He just finds these various objects. That's why it's called Force Collector. And eventually he goes and finds his great-grandfather, who was a Jedi who cut himself off from the Force and hid, rather than try to face the First Order, and does not, has been disconnected from the galaxy for a long time. So they, at the end of the novel, Kar decides that he is going to, instead of training as a Jedi, because he doesn't think his Force abilities lay in that direction, he is going to start collecting these artifacts to maybe teach people about the Jedi and the truth of history, rather than decide to follow the way of his great-grandfather.
Which in a way sounds like what Luke could have done. I mean, he was very much not about teaching the Jedi way more so than warning about the effects of the Jedi way.
Yeah, and we do get some recurring characters here. Yeah, we do see Doc Ondar on Batuu, who gives him a Jedi Temple helmet, and then truly the person who sets him on the right path is Maz Kanata, who he goes and meets on Takodana.
So as far as just who this is geared towards, when you were describing the beginning of it, it almost sounds like a Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer adventure, across the stars. It seems a little more mature than that, though, by the time you go through and you get through Kar's motivation and what he ultimately wants to do. So who would you say this is geared towards?
So if you're a big fan of the Clone Wars, or the depiction of psychometry, this explores a cool Force power. If you're like, what did people think about the Jedi, like the average person, this dives into that subject. It's a pretty quick read. Our main characters are 17 years old, so definitely on a YA context. It's not a long book by any means, but we get some good moments, like his talk with his great-grandfather about how his great-grandfather barely survived fighting the Grand Inquisitor during Order 66 and after being hunted down later. It's very interesting. So I like the world building here that using psychometry allows. So from the fact that people still hold on to Inquisitor, even though the Inquisitorius has been shut down, that the artifacts of the Inquisitors are still around. How barely anyone remembers the Jedi, especially on far-flung planets that never had a great Jedi presence to begin with. So all of that I found very interesting. As a book itself, our protagonist is fairly young and emotionally unregulated and kind of annoying. And his best friend, Maze, who may be a love interest, may not, we're not sure. But she's precocious and irreverent and privileged, so she's also kind of annoying. But they both, that's the point of a YA novel. They then gain perspective and grow as people as the novel goes on. And Maze accepts that, okay, maybe I should respect my mother's traditions more, and maybe my father's distaste for Marillion culture is because, oh no, he's part of the First Order. Maybe that's why he doesn't like my mother's culture, and so on.
So interesting. Sounds like a little bit of discrimination we're dealing with here. The adventure itself sounds like another diverse tale. My last question of the day will be, how does this serve Batuu as an environment?
So it really serves Batuu in that it's reinforcing, hey, you can go find anything on Batuu, because their first stop when they leave is to go to Batuu and visit Doc Ondar, the purveyor of curiosities, who will sell anything to anyone. and that he has this great collection of artifacts that you can peruse from, and that is how we connect to the greater Batuu trilogy. And then it's also intended to sort of show the legend of Luke Skywalker, and that he's one of the few Jedi Knights whose names Carr is actually able to find.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense for the time, being the only mainstay Jedi. But excellent. So,
yeah. And I'd actually be down to see Carr again, like as if he's running collecting Jedi artifacts, and then Rey rolls him into her school or whatever. I would be into that, but this can be read as a standalone YA Star Wars novel,
mm-hmm.
Exploring a powerful, Force-sensitive youngster in the time of the First Order, who. The interesting part was seeing how crippling having Force sensitivity is
mm-hmm.
if you're not a native like Anakin Skywalker who can just use it to pod race without any ill effects.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, if they don't receive formal training in the Force, it can be terrifying,
mm-hmm.
especially with his powerful abilities. He's Force choking people and not knowing what he's doing. He has to wear gloves all the time because if he touches the wrong object, he could be out with a migraine and doesn't have any way to decipher his visions. So, and all of that, I would say, is an interesting showing of how someone who's not a prodigy, but it just has standard Force sensitivity,
mm-hmm.
would work in a galaxy where there is no schooling or information available.
So yeah, sounds like an interesting tale, and if we take a look at everything here, it really goes back to this idea of we have so much that we have generated. There's so much in the Star Wars galaxy. One, how can we begin to pay it off? And two, how can we tell stories that are different? So, as a result of what we see here and the, success or lack thereof of Rise of Skywalker, we get the Mandalorian, as you said, which is this new character in a familiar setting. That's for a bit was the MO for Disney Plus, and whether they're successful in that kind of varies from season to season. But in the books, at least, it's a great testing ground as far as providing very different kinds of stories than what your typical Star Wars fan is looking for.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'm hoping that we eventually get more tie-in media to things like The Mandalorian and Ahsoka. Mm-hmm. They have recently announced a bunch of novels coming out to support the story of the Acolyte, set under the High Republic banner. So I'm into that idea as well.
For sure.
The more interconnected and high-quality media we can get in Star Wars, the better.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily make a universe seem smaller. It doesn't have to do that. It could help to make it seem richer. So, yeah.
Well, that is our episode 7 of our EU review on novels. I believe we will have another episode or two to bring us current to where we'll be by the end of 2024 before diving into the sideline of extended novels that is the entire High Republic series. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed our novel review today. Feel free to give any of these you're interested in a listen and let us know your thoughts on the episode at reddit.com/r/talking Star Wars.
Until then. We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.